Good evening, I'm Nathaniel DUECK, filling in for Nima Rajan. This is Forum Daily for Tuesday, February 7th. We begin the newscast tonight with a long-awaited meeting on healthcare funding. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau met with all of Canada's premiers today to negotiate a new healthcare deal. Mr. Trudeau says his government will increase the Canada Health Transfer by $196 billion over the next decade. Canada's premiers say they're disappointed in Ottawa's offer to increase the funding. They sat down with the Prime Minister, where he put an offer on the table that fell short of what they were asking for. Premiers wanted to see an immediate cash injection of $28 billion and yearly increases after that, but Ottawa has offered an estimated $46 billion in new funding over 10 years. Well, Canada will provide $10 million in earthquake relief funding to Syria and Turkey. The federal government made the announcement today, saying the money is part of an initial aid package. International Development Minister Harjit Sajjan says Ottawa is also conducting a needs assessment for further aid and is also considering deploying the country's disaster assistance response team to help with rescue efforts. The death toll of Monday's earthquake has surpassed 7,200 and is expected to rise as further search and rescue operations continue. Defense Minister Anita Anand has confirmed that a Chinese air balloon spotted over the U.S. airspace last week also violated Canadian airspace. The government has not provided any further details about where or when. Opposition parties say the public deserves answers to questions like why information about the balloon wasn't shared until after it left Canadian airspace, why it wasn't stopped sooner, and what steps are being done to prevent and punish spy efforts by China. The balloon was shot down off the coast of South Carolina by the U.S. on Sunday. Well, this comes as a new poll suggests that a majority of Canadians still see the U.S. as their country's closest ally, even in an age of isolationism and protectionist policies. The online survey by Ligier for the Association for Canadian Studies found 69% of respondents still see the U.S. as Canada's best friend, while 31% disagreed or didn't know. Canadians do seem more divided, however, on whether the U.S. is a positive influence on the international affairs. The survey comes as U.S. President Joe Biden prepares to deliver his second State of the Union speech tonight. Well, Ottawa will spend $2 million on an international commission to offer advice on unmarked graves at the sites of former residential schools in Canada. A statement from the Office of Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Mark Miller says a technical agreement will be signed with the International Commission on Missing Persons. Based out of The Hague, the organization works in different countries to help identify the remains of those who have disappeared or been killed in conflicts and disasters. An emergency management specialist says post-tropical storm Fiona shows it may be time for Canada to develop a more robust disaster response system. Glenn McGilvery, managing director at the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction, says relying on volunteers and donations to the Red Cross doesn't make sense. He suggests Canada may want to consider establishing a dedicated department like the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, in the United States. The Canadian Red Cross says it has spent or committed $48.6 million raised in donations to helping those affected by Fiona, which hit on September 24th of last year. Well, if you are wondering how much you'll need to save in order to retire, it could involve 7 figures. According to a new BMO survey, Canadians now think they will need $1.7 million in savings in order to stop working. That's 20% more than what they thought when asked 3 years ago. The bank says it's a reflection of people's concerns about inflation and the cost of living, but noted that many people overestimate how much they'll need to retire. Well, in some troubling economic news, Canadian business and consumer insolvencies were both up in 2022. The Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy says the number of insolvencies filed by Canadian businesses last year was up 37.2% compared to 2021. Consumer insolvencies were up 11.2%. The federal regulator says accommodation, food services businesses, and the construction industry saw the biggest increases in insolvencies. Well, on the West Coast, a new coalition is aiming to save wild salmon from a current outlook described as dire. The First Nations Fisheries Council of British Columbia has joined with the Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance, the Upper Fraser Fisheries Conservation Alliance, the Pacific Salmon Foundation, and the First Nations Summit to find solutions to help save the iconic species from extinction. The Save Our Salmon Coalition says Pacific salmon populations have declined by more than 90% since the 1970s. Now, it's warning that if stocks collapse, more species, including the southern resident killer whales, are likely also at risk of extinction. Well, Forum Daily will be right back after the break. And when we return, we're going to be taking a look at the impact of rising interest rates on Canadian homeowners with Executive Vice President of Maru Public Opinion, John Wright. After that, we'll take a look at China's spy balloon with somebody from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Stay with us. We'll be right back after a short break. Well, amid rising inflation and interest rates, new research finds that 1 in 3 Canadian homeowners are worried they will not be able to afford the new rates for long before they're forced to leave their homes. A new poll conducted by Maru Public Opinion has found that 35% of homeowners with a financial encumbrance attached to their residence don't think they'll be able to last more than an average of 9.7 months before they're forced to sell or leave their home. This under the Bank of Canada's 4.5% prime lending rate. Now, that timeline is even shorter for people with a variable or adjustable rate mortgage or line of credit on their home. The finding comes as a recent Leger poll finds that 1 in 3 households say they are worse off now than compared to a year ago. Joining us to unpack the study is Mr. John Wright, Executive Vice President of Maru Public Opinion. Mr. Wright, welcome to Forum Daily.
It's great to be with you, Nathaniel.
So if you can, for our viewers, just give a brief overview of the key findings of this survey.
Well, of course, we took a survey of Canadians and a subset of those who actually have either a variable or a fixed mortgage or a line of credit. And what we found was 70% of people across this country being affected by interest rates. And the Bank of Canada has recently driven it up to 4.5%. And even though they're holding and they may have to go higher at some point, interest rates affect more than just houses. They affect credit cards, lines of credit, and a whole series of other things. So Canadians right now have been feeling the pinch, especially with the inflation being as high as it has been.
And to build off of that, the poll is showing that some homeowners have timelines that they're talking about now under the new interest rates before they have to leave their houses. So what does that mean?
Well, it means that there's a lot of people under pressure right now. We know for a fact that there's about 65% of those people who have mortgages that are almost at a trigger rate, that they're going to have to make either another financial arrangement to look after themselves, or they're going to have to sell and get out. And I think within the next 3 months, probably by the end of the second quarter, we're going to see a lot of people, in fact, defaulting, maybe moving into the marketplace. And then we're already starting to see that in some ways, but that's what we're looking at right now is almost 19% of variable mortgage rate holders who are going to have to do something about it because the pinch is getting very difficult to handle.
The pinch isn't just happening to those with encumbrances on, but we also found that the study that just over half of homeowners without a loan or mortgage said they've also been affected by the rising rates. So I suppose the question is, how significant is the overall interest rate to the health of the housing market right now?
Well, there's 2 things that are happening. First of all, the Bank of Canada wants to bring down that inflation rate from about 6.8% down to 2%. Canadians believe that the current 4.5% interest rate is not good enough. It's probably going to have to go to 6.8. These are all guesses, of course, but when I use these terms, as you know, that means the banks are probably 1.5 to 2 points higher. So you're looking at a hockey stick curve of interest rates that have gone up in the last year or so. And a lot of people weren't expecting it. They got into the market with some assurance from both the borrower, from the lenders, and from the Bank of Canada that it wasn't going to happen that quickly. So the housing market's going to cool. We're already seeing reductions in the overall price that's out there. We're going to have people who, in fact, if you can afford the mortgage, you can shop around a little bit. But there's going to be a lot of people who are caught between the debt that they owe and the debt they're piling up to keep in those houses. And what's going to happen is you're going to end up with the residual in the middle that they're going to have to figure out what to do with.
Well, and homeowners leaving their homes, I think we already have a hot rental market right now. So what are the implications for that?
Well, huge. I think we've got rental markets have increased their prices across many different areas of about 23% over the course of the year. So we're going to have more people moving out of houses and into rental facilities because that's what they're going to have to do. Then it's going to push the price up. Look, the one thing that we're caught in, and we're not going to really know when this is looked after, is inflation itself. We're not going to know for another couple of quarters to figure out whether or not we're going to be in a recession, or in fact, we're going to be wrestling this to a soft recession where we can kind of make through the next number of months. and not have a whole lot of people lose their jobs and lose their houses. We're right at the pinnacle of figuring out whether that's going to happen. And the rental market and the housing market are going to go through some very significant changes in between.
I suppose just a quick 30 seconds left here, but what are you watching for in the next little bit after the release of this report?
I'd say in the next 2 months, I'm going to be watching for those people who unfortunately are going to have to give up their homes and go into a different way. That's going to cause a significant ripple in the marketplace. And I think in terms of overall structures moving forward, the people who are going to end up in the longest end of the stick are those who wanted to get into the market in the first place. A lot of young people who see this as a goal that they can't even get close to. Those are the people that I'm going to be watching after this.
Some troubling news. Mr. John Wright, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Nathaniel.
China says it will resolutely safeguard its legitimate rights and interests over the shooting down of a suspected Chinese spy balloon by the United States. The incident has prompted U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to cancel a visit to Beijing that had offered slight hopes for an improvement in relations. China says the object was a civilian balloon used for meteorological research, but has refused to say to whom it belongs. China's foreign ministry has criticized the U.S. for overreacting and using force. It is demanding that the United States return the debris, which American authorities have said they intend to collect for study. With us to discuss the situation is Nathan Picarsic, a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defensive Democracies with a focus on China policy. Mr. Picarsic, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me, Nathaniel.
So I suppose a little recap is in order here. What do we know so far about the balloon incident?
So we know that the Chinese are claiming ownership. They're claiming that it was a civilian research device meant for meteorological sensing. We know that these types of devices are made in China by subsidiaries of some of China's largest chemical conglomerates. And we know that the United States took the initiative to shoot it down. But beyond that, right now, I think we're still sitting in limbo to learn more about how this will be resolved.
A lot to discover still, indeed. Now, in discovering the balloon, the U.S. Secretary of State canceled his plans to visit China. Now, I suppose, what does this mean for the U.S.-China diplomatic rapprochement, or at least détente anyway?
Yeah, there was some sense in the lead up to this incident that there was a cooling of tensions and there may be détente of some sort. I think this puts that to rest. I think this incident demonstrates loud and clear that the Chinese are intending to compete with the United States and other Western democratic actors, and that the United States and its allies and partners need to stand up for their own sovereignty. I think this probably should put a calm to discussion of détente and lead to a broader awakening among American public as well as among allied and partner public audiences.
Now, what I found interesting watching this unfold was China's response, which began with expressing regret for the situation, the violation of U.S. airspace, but then moved to saying that American authorities must return the debris. So what has been your overall takeaway from China's response to this incident, and what are you watching for here?
I think China's recognized that the American public has caught wind of this incident. China's trying to put forward a strong face domestically for their own audience, trying to not be pushed around by the United States. But at the same time, I think Chinese leaders realize that this incident sort of got away from them, became a bit more prominent among American public, and presents an escalatory risk. They're trying diplomatically to assert some escalation dominance. But I think to some extent they're caught off guard here, particularly by the public reaction. And I think that's one of the lessons to be taken here, that we need more transparency around incidents like this, because the American public, the public audiences across North America and the Western Hemisphere need to be aware of the risks posed by the Chinese Communist Party and actions like surveillance balloons and other potential surveillance technologies that place at risk our own sovereignty.
And you brought up transparency, and interesting enough, in The Independent today, it was quoted, your colleague Craig Singleton with the FDD said that this is not the first Chinese spy balloon spotted. So what do we know about these previous incidents?
We don't know a lot, and that's part of the problem. We need to have more transparency around these incidents. We know there are several others that appear to be taking place right now. We have heard reports about several that occurred with little public fanfare, but I think that underscores this point that we need more transparency, because it's not just a government to government or official to official type of risk. The American public is placed at risk by the actions that the Chinese Communist Party takes, and the threat that they pose to our domestic sovereignty.
And oppositions here in Canada are calling for more transparency as well. They're calling for the government to give out information, given that it crossed Canadian airspace as well. And we know Republican lawmakers have criticized the Biden administration for not shooting the balloon down earlier. A quick 30 seconds. What is your assessment of the administration's handling of this incident?
Yeah, I think ultimately the right action was taken, but it was taken too slowly. I think transparency is a fair critique here, in the area where we need to have more improvement. Certainly, we can't disclose things that shouldn't be disclosed, that introduce additional national security risks. But the public needs to know what's going on with these incidents, trends over time, and what's placed at risk when there are incursions of American sovereignty by the Chinese Communist Party.
Mr. Nathan Picarsic, thank you for joining us on Forum Daily today. Lots to keep our eyes on.
Thank you, Nathaniel.
We'll be right back after a short break here on Forum Daily. Stay with us. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has declared a state of emergency for 10 cities as the search for earthquake survivors continues. Yesterday's 7.8 magnitude earthquake and several aftershocks left more than 7,200 people dead in Turkey and Syria. More than 8,000 people have been pulled from the debris in Turkey alone, with some 380,000 others turning to government shelters or hotels for shelter. In Ukraine, officials say Russian shelling has hit more civilian targets. It comes ahead of what Kyiv authorities are expecting to be an impending new offensive by Russia around the anniversary of its invasion. Regional Ukrainian emergency services said a hospital in the northeastern town in the Kharkiv region caught fire late Monday as a result of Russian shelling. 8 patients were evacuated from the hospital, and the fire caused no casualties. According to a new report by the UN's International Development Agency, sub-Saharan Africa is the new global epicenter of violent Islamist extremism. It also finds that people are increasingly joining as a result of economic factors and less by religious ones. The report by the United Nations Development Program, released on Tuesday, said that 92% of the recruits to extremist groups are joining for better jobs and pressing poverty, when compared to the numbers in a previous report released in 2017. It said the livelihoods of many people in Africa have been badly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, high inflation, and climate change. Tonight, U.S. President Joe Biden will deliver the State of the Union address, his second since taking office. The speech comes before a politically divided Congress and comes as the U.S. struggles with economic uncertainty, a wearying war in Ukraine, and growing tensions with China. A recent poll of U.S. adults found that only a quarter of them believe the country is headed in the right direction under Mr. Biden's leadership. The majority of Democrats who responded to the Associated Press poll says they don't want Mr. Biden to seek a second term. Hundreds of thousands of protesters rallied across France today over the government's pension reform plans. The demonstrations came one day after French lawmakers started debating a pension bill that would raise the minimum retirement age from 62 to 64 by 2030. French President Emmanuel Macron has vowed to go ahead with the legislation, despite opinion polls showing increased opposition to it. In the latest move amid Lebanon's spiraling economic crisis, battered commercial banks have closed their doors to customers in a protest of a recent court ruling. The ruling forced one of the country's largest banks to pay out 2 of its depositors their trapped savings in cash. The Association of Banks in Lebanon, which lobbies for the banks, released a statement Tuesday calling the action an open-ended strike. It criticized the court ruling, claiming it was detrimental to all depositors because the banks cannot afford to pay out everyone's savings in full. In the UK, Bitcoin is moving closer to reality. UK authorities formally asked for public comment on Monday on the idea of introducing a central bank digital currency. It would be backed by the Bank of England, which says the new currency would be, quote, reliable and retain its value over time. The United Kingdom is home to the world's second biggest financial center, but is trailing former colonies like Nigeria, the Bahamas, and Jamaica in rolling out a digital currency. Consultant PwC says more than 80% of the world's central banks are considering launching digital currencies or have already done so. Well, Google is girding up for a battle of wits in the field of artificial intelligence with Bard. Now, that's the name the company has given its conversational AI service, reportedly aimed at countering the popularity of the ChatGPT tool backed by Microsoft. Google's chat box is supposed to be able to explain complex subjects such as outer space discoveries in terms simple enough for a child to understand. It also claims it can perform other helpful tasks, such as coming up with lunch ideas based on what's left in the refrigerator. A record number of American adults plan to bet on this year's Super Bowl. The American Gaming Association forecasts that a total of $16 billion will be wagered on Sunday's NFL championship game between the Philadelphia Eagles and Kansas City Chiefs. The estimate includes legal bets as well as those placed with illegal bookies and casual wagers among friends or family. The amount is more than double the amount from last year. Well, some good news for people feeling overwhelmed at San Francisco's Chase Center with a Canadian connection. Canadian actor Simu Liu, who's best known for playing Marvel superhero Shang-Chi, says he wants everyone who attends events at the Chase Center to feel welcome, comfortable, and supported. Now there's the Simu Liu sensory room, complete with carpeted walls, lighting features, puzzles, and games to provide a quiet space for guests who might feel overwhelmed or overstimulated. The new facility comes just 5 months after Mr. Liu opened up about his own challenges with anxiety. I'm Nathaniel DUECK, filling in for Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today on Forum Daily. Remember, for more news, you can visit our website at thenewsforum.ca and make sure to follow us on our social media. Be well.